Welcome to Sovereign Finance, the show that connects the dots between personal finance, global finance trends, and deep human history. Tune in every week to demystify the money puzzle and protect your interests in a turbulent world. Welcome to Sovereign Finance. I'm your host, Rob Drummond, here as always with Derek Dearden. How's it going, Derek?
Great, thanks, Rob, and you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. So you might be interested to hear this. I recently picked up a book called Debts, The First 5,000 Years
Yeah, I've
by
got
a
it
guy
too.
called David Graeber. I have to confess I've only read about 3% of it. So when you proposed this week's topic, which is good debt and bad debt, I was like, well, maybe this is actually quite an old thing and something to explore. So where do we need to start?
Okay, well, first thing to say is that debt is obviously a major part of today's world to an extent which in modern times it never has been until the last decade or so. And to a certain extent, this is an inevitable outcome of the structure of the global financial system, particularly since the dollar came off the gold standard and therefore decoupled effectively the entire world's currency system from any kind of objective existence. All the money in circulation really is debt to somebody or other.
Well, that's what it's always said on the banknote, isn't it? It's like promise to pay the bearer the sum of whatever.
Yeah, well, of course, I think as we've commented before, those statements these days are meaningless.
Yeah.
They used to say, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £1 in gold. And even though from 1933 onwards, that hadn't been literally true in Britain, it was still printed on the banknotes. Now they just say, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £10 or £20 or £5, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
What are they going to do? Give you another banknote in exchange for it?
We're back in why.
Yeah. So effectively, any money in existence is something which is owed to somebody else. And as I think we've already mentioned in other contexts, the money which is brought into existence when a bank makes a loan to somebody then either goes back into their account, or they pay somebody to buy something. It goes into that person's account, either in that bank or another bank, which has created more reserves in the banking system, which provides them with this capability of advancing further loans on the basis that the reserve requirement is maybe 10%, maybe 5%, maybe 2% of the money that the bank is allowed to issue. So every time there's another deposit, it gives them the capacity to make more loans. They have to keep this rolling. And we've seen the growth of it in various ways. We've seen the inflation of housing costs, which has been directly as a result of there being more money available to loan out as home loans. And of course, there's also been the manipulation of interest rates, which acclimatise people to paying larger amounts when the interest rate goes up. And since they've got used to treating that as the norm, enables them to increase the bid price on housing when the rate goes down. Also, student loans, in principle, to invest in your future, by paying for an education is arguably a sound thing to do. This, of course, assumes that you really are going to have a greater earning capacity in the marketplace if you get a university degree. And of course, there's a great many. I mean, that makes sense if you're going to be a doctor or a
Something where
financier
that's the
or a
only route
lawyer.
in, and it is quite a
Mm,
stringent route in.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And it was very sneaky the way that the student loans were brought in. I mean, I was lucky enough at the time I went to university. Not only did we not have to borrow money, but unless your parents were very wealthy, um, grant covered the payment of your fees, which you didn't even see or think about, and they also gave you enough to live on. I mean, my father had to contribute a certain amount towards the maintenance grant, as it was called, the living allowance, in the grant system. But having made that up to the recommended amount, that was actually quite enough to live on for the 3 terms of the university year. And I have to say, not even terribly frugally. When they brought it in, it was announced as though it was a kind of government scheme, and there was a promise that the rate of interest would be effectively nominal. It was, I think, calculated as being the official rate of inflation plus a kind of 1% or something like that. And so effectively you were simply paying later for what you're getting now. Of course, I don't know how long that nominal rate of interest persisted for, but I think it's been quietly dropped, and it's certainly a hefty real rate of interest. In fact, the way it works out, a great many people are going to be paying that off over an entire lifetime, and probably in a significant number of cases will never get around to paying it back.
And the fees are the student fees have gone up a lot as well. Like even since when I first started, like I remember if I'd have got a year later, like the tuition fees would have been 3 times the amount. And
Yeah,
I only did the 3-year course. So if you're doing dentistry, if you're doing dentistry or something where you might be studying for 6 years.
yeah, yeah. I think I heard that in the United States, doctors, by the time they qualified, it poked up $500,000 in debt
Yeah.
uh, on their student loans, which means they're then effectively indentured servants to the medical industry.
It feels like a trap. It feels like that's kind of deliberate.
Yeah. Anyway, so is there any situation where this is not entirely pernicious? Because as I said, the title I had for this talk today was Good Debt and Bad Debt. And if we go back and look at what we were discussing when in the episode on capital, we defined capital as being a specific type of wealth which is used to generate more wealth. We would think, if you look at that in the context of a small business, for instance, somebody running a carpentry business, in order to do that, they need workshop space, they need a certain amount of machinery, bench saws, planers, they need tools, they probably need a van to move around in, they need some initial stock of lumber to make into the furniture and so forth. So different businesses have obviously got different requirements for capital, but it's fair to say that any kind of enterprise is going to need some assets within it in order to operate the business. And so that means that unless you actually have got the money already sitting around in a savings account or so when you start up, you're going to have to get it from somewhere. And essentially you either get it from somebody who's prepared to be an investor in the business and take ownership of a part of the business and be entitled to a stream of the proportion of profits from it, or you have to borrow it. And in the case of most small businesses, it's going to be a question of borrowing it. So, assume somebody wants to set themselves up as the carpenter. They've worked out that they are going to need £20,000 to acquire the necessary assets to get the business moving. Then they can evaluate what they're going to be likely to make as a profit over the course of a year, and what proportion of that they can pay back, pay off the loan, and also pay any interest on the loan while they're doing that. So that is, if you like, a sound use of debt, and it's worth having a look at that in terms of how much the business is financed by debt and how much it is financed by either absentee owners in the form of shareholders and investors, or in terms of the actual actors within the business owning it. And if you think that a business might be making, let's say, 20% profit of the each year of the capital that's tied up in the business, if they can borrow money at a smaller amount for that investment, that's going to increase the available profitability. But of course, that can work in both directions. That's called gearing or leverage, and it's on the principle that if you've got a long lever, you can apply more force at the shorter end of the seesaw than at the end that you're moving, and vice versa. But of course, that can go in reverse. If in a certain year you don't make as great a proportion of profit, but you've still got to pay the interest on the money that's been borrowed to go into it, then that can eat up the profit and actually leave you with a net loss at the end of that year. Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say on this particular topic for now. Is there anything that comes up for you else of what we've said so far?
I think debt. So I think pretty much along the lines of what you said, I think debt can be a tool that you can use. Like, this was why corporations were created in the first place, was to achieve things that you wouldn't be able to personally finance. And you can still use that mechanism. But I think we want to be wary of, a bit like with the student loan situation, getting caught in a sort of debt trap that means that you're probably never going to clear those debts, maybe be beholden to a system of some sort. You might be trapped in the same line of work for forever.
And I think you'll find in that book by David Graeber, you will probably find reference to the fact that in the ancient world, very often rulers had what they, in the Bible, it's referred to as a jubilee. Every 50 years, or it might have been 7 times 7 years, which was 49, they had what they called a jubilee, and they cancelled the debts and put everybody back on an even footing, because they did that not out of a spirit of open-heartedness, but out of a necessity to keep society functioning, because it had been observed that the tendency was for the primary capital, which of course in a pre-industrial society, the primary form of capital is agricultural land. And at the outset of the creation of farming, this was smallholder farmers, what they would have called yeoman farmers at some points. And each time one of those went into debt, they would end up, if they couldn't service the debt and they couldn't repay the debt, they would end up losing the land, and the land would be held in more and more monopolistic holdings. And of course, that's what happened in America. In America, when the pioneers went out and settled across the continent, they each had their own little 40 acres and a mule or whatever it was, and they farmed that, and they managed to support themselves and their families by farming that land and by selling the produce. And then in the 1930s, in the Great Depression, the farms had all borrowed to invest in agricultural machinery, which on the face of it was a sensible idea. And then both because of ecological factors, which were themselves the result of unsound environmental policies, we had the vast open spaces and the dust bowls, the wind blowing the dust away, and also because of the collapse of the economy in the Great Depression, they weren't able to service those debts. And so the bank foreclosed and owned the farms. And of course, many of the banks then found that they couldn't sell either the farms or the agricultural machinery that they repossessed because nobody was operating it. A lot of the smaller banks across the country went out of business and were absorbed by a much smaller number of large banks. And it ended up with the large banks owning all the land, and they then issued those to large corporate agricultural enterprises, which is how it has come about today that the vast amount of the United States farmland is owned by a relatively small number of people. And this is obviously a process which is about to come to a head in one form or another in the next few years. And we'll just have to see how all of that unfolds.
Land ownership in the UK is also very consolidated, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think in particular in Scotland, actually. Yeah.
Well, of course, the land holding in this country goes back, in a centralised kind of way, goes back a lot further in history. Certainly, when William the Conqueror arrived in 1066 and brought over his knights, and they pretty much carved up the country between themselves, and of course that's what all of these coats of arms are. They were the heraldic symbols of the effectively French nobility that took over the country. And to this day, a large proportion of the land is owned by the descendants of those people who moved in on it by force of arms in those days. The number of independent landowners was far smaller.
Very good. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave this one here. And
okay, thank you.
We'll speak to everyone next time.
Okay, thanks, Ron.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sovereign Finance. For more episodes, transcripts, in-depth articles, and the community, please take a minute now to subscribe free at sovereignfinance.substack.com. See you next time.